Okay, so here we're going to go through the 7 features of the system that are described and presented to comprise the construct of higher order cognition as it's laid out in the neurodevelopmental framework. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to take some time to just speak to you about each of these 7 features, and then what you'll be doing for your weekly assignment this week is this database activity that I'm listing at the bottom of each of the slides. That should correlate to what you're being asked to do for your assignment for this week. So you're welcome to just watch these slides all the way through and then go back and complete the assignment. Or if you find it preferable, you may want to have a screen up also with the Moodle page, and then as we go through each of the 7 features, you're more than welcome to, of course, pause these slides and then fill in that portion of the database activity for this week. Okay, here we go. So as you most likely already know, higher order thinking involves these really complex ways of interacting with and information to make sense of concepts or ideas. So the features presented here are really designed to offer a way to categorize the kinds of cognitive processes that underlie higher order thinking. And as a heads up, they're not meant to be mutually exclusive or boundaries and categories that are necessarily fixed and are never open to interpretation or modification. Rather, these 7 features are intended as a nice way to anchor your thinking about the kinds of higher order tasks that students are presented with or that they're asked to engage in order to learn. So as I describe these 7 features, once again, I encourage you to draw connections to the kinds of thinking demanded by the learning tasks and activities your students engage in your classroom and throughout the school day. And at the bottom of each slide, you'll see that reminder to complete the database activity. For each of the 7 features, you're going to be asked to present a classroom task or learning activity to illustrate that feature. And then once you've completed all your entries into the database, please feel free to go back and take a look at the entries posted by your peers, if you can access them, to give our whole group kind of an opportunity to develop a deeper understanding of the ways that higher order thinking is required for participation in school in ways that are both obvious and not so obvious. So this slide presents the first feature, concept formation. And concept formation is defined as integrating a series of features that often go together to form a class of ideas or objects. So for the purpose of considering higher order cognition, it's important to note here that this definition is oriented towards students' thinking rather than towards teachers' instruction. So curriculum materials and some standards themselves also, of course, refer to concepts. But they do so most often by describing the concepts teachers are asked to present or to give to students. But within this construct of higher order cognition, we really want to emphasize here the student's work to integrate ideas and objects that constructs concepts, rather than their recall of information previously presented or described in class. So this is more oriented toward the constructivist theory of teaching that focuses most closely on creating opportunities for students to engage in concept formation, with the idea that the thinking involved in this process deepens student learning and understanding. And within this idea of concept formation in higher order thinking, it can occur through these 3 dimensions. There's verbal conceptualization, which is forming concepts using language. There's nonverbal conceptualization, which is forming concepts without using language, pictorially, or in some other sensory mode. And then there's process conceptualization, which involves forming concepts that can explain a mechanism or how something works. So you're welcome to pause these slides here or keep going, but the next kind of task that you're going to be asked to do is to take a moment to consider how concept formation looks in your classroom in terms of verbal conceptualization, nonverbal conceptualization, or process conceptualization. What are the demands placed upon students in your classroom? And please go ahead and then you can add an entry into the database assignment. The next feature of the system that's presented for higher order cognition is critical thinking. And that's defined as being able to evaluate products, ideas, or opinions. So this particular feature has been emphasized a lot in recent discussions of 21st century skills, and is also mentioned quite frequently and repeatedly throughout the Common Core state standards. And as schools seek to prepare students to kind of navigate these massive quantities of information easily accessed through the internet and the resources of digital information, critical thinking is especially important to support students in developing. So being able to evaluate the credibility, perspectives, or trustworthiness of multiple sources is really important for today's students in ways that it wasn't in the past years. And it's likely, of course, that the amount of information made available to all of us will continue to increase over time rather than decrease. So this makes an emphasis on understanding how to support students in developing critical thinking especially important, both now and in the next several years. So take a moment and think about the classroom tasks or learning activities that you would consider demand students or support students to engage in critical thinking. And then just take a moment after watching these slides or now to add that entry to the database. Okay, next is creativity and brainstorming. So this speaks to thinking independently and producing these self-generated thoughts or other products or ideas. I'm going to guess that if you've spent much time in the classroom, creativity and brainstorming can be a really polarizing activity for students. For some students, a brainstorming activity or an opportunity to express themselves creatively provides a very welcome relief from other aspects of the school day that can be stressful or straining to them. For other students, being asked to brainstorm or generate independent creative ideas in and of itself is a stress-inducing task. And a lot of that has to do with that student's facility with and strength or weakness in higher order cognition. However, by connecting school-based knowledge to students' own areas of interest through creativity, there are many students who are typically disengaged with school in general, but then can become engaged via this topic in particular that is an area of knowledge and interest. So quite often for students who are working to develop a creative sense or to generate ideas in brainstorming for writing or for a different kind of task in the classroom, by housing that task or situating that task in an area of interest or knowledge for a student, the work of creative thinking is vastly easier and more available to students than attempting to think creatively on topics of which there's little knowledge background to rely upon. In addition, by making space for student creativity in the classroom through activities, teachers can actually work on learning about what students value, what they're excited about, and the unique skills and funds of knowledge that they bring to the class. So take a moment and see if you can think of and perhaps add an example of a classroom task or learning activity that in your room that you think involves creativity and brainstorming. Okay, next we're going to think about problem solving, which is defined within the neurodevelopmental framework as applying a systematic, stepwise approach to complex questions or challenges. So although problem solving has historically been fundamental, right, to math instruction, of course problem solving can be incorporated into learning activities across the content areas. For example, the science of engineering is dedicated entirely to solving problems, and group or independent classroom projects are typically filled with opportunities for students to engage in social problem solving as they investigate questions and communicate information to and with peers. So that said, it's really important to bear in mind that this component of higher order cognition speaks in particular to complex problems. These are the problems that have no real obvious answer or solution and really require students to engage in deep thinking over time. This is not simplistic problem solving, but rather the kinds of problem solving that produces struggle for students, which can be framed for students as a feature of problem solving that's most productive. So supporting students in understanding that struggle can be thought of as a productive task in the pursuit of solving problems can be really vital to their persistence and willingness to participate in challenging problems in the classroom. Take a minute See if you can think of a classroom task or learning activity that you think involves problem solving and post that entry when you can. All right, next is rule use, which is defined as learning, developing, and applying rules and principles. So as mentioned before, it's really important to keep in mind thinking beyond the superficial application of predetermined rules. So rule use in this higher order cognition construct is not simply following the steps of an easily recalled rule, but rather thinking, drawing upon a knowledge of multiple potential rules or generating unique and new rules to address a complex question posed or presented. Encouraging students' higher order cognition in the classroom through thinking about rules that support understanding, in terms of doing that in the classroom and encouraging higher order thinking, in offering students opportunities to derive rules with peers or together as a whole class, and to generate and articulate rules that may be implicit can really help them learn and understand how rules operate to support cognition and learning. And that's the kind of rule use we want to think about in terms of this construct. Take a moment, think of a classroom task or activity that you think involves rule use, and please add that to the database activity. Okay, next is reasoning and logical thinking, which entails coming up with sensible, thoughtful answers to complex issues. So to identify an answer as sensible or thoughtful, students have to be able to evaluate their own thinking in light of the question posed or the issue presented. That in and of itself is a really sophisticated and complex thinking task, but it's crucial and in high demand for students really at all ages and grade levels at school. So as an example, that recent emphasis on verbally explaining reasoning or explaining reasoning through writing to justify mathematical solutions that's accompanied most of the curricular materials and the related to the Common Core transition calls upon students to be really skilled in articulating their reasoning and thinking in the first place, and then in expressing that to others in a meaningful and concise manner. So classroom tasks that help students access the kind of thinking they're being asked to describe can be really helpful, not just for engaging students deeply with the content itself, but also as a tool to support success with the new assessments and the new expectations for mathematical thinking and reasoning and really across all content areas as described and presented in the Common Core. So if you can think of an example of reasoning and logical thinking tasks or activities that are presented in your classroom, please do that and enter it into the database. And finally, the last feature of higher order cognition presented in the neurodevelopmental framework is mental representation, which is defined as portraying new ideas in one's mind so that they're meaningful and long-lasting. Now, this aspect of higher order thinking can be really, really challenging for students who have difficulty with memory, attention, language, or spatial ordering, since those constructs are all involved in mental manipulations of visualizations that are necessary to create these representations. If a student doesn't understand a new idea itself due to a weakness in language, or a student misses a concept entirely due to challenges with attention, then accessing and constructing a mental representation may be entirely impossible. That said, guiding students to develop skills in creating mental representations for information can be extremely helpful and can certainly support memory, recall, and understanding. So in this way, once again, higher order cognition doesn't operate independently of the other constructs. It's involved with the other constructs and can either constrain or support and encourage a student's ability, facility, and skill in language, in attention, in memory, and in spatial thinking or temporal sequential ordering. Take a moment, please, and when you're ready, then you can add an idea to the database of a classroom task or activity that you think involves or includes mental representation. Okay, I hope you enjoy this assignment. It's designed to be useful, so hopefully it is. And once again, I will look forward to seeing you all, or as many of you who are able to attend, at our Zoom session this Wednesday. See you soon.